Coachella, I love you, man. What's going on? I gotta tell you, my adrenaline's through the roof right now, so forgive me if I have trouble speaking, because it's like...
The air at Coachella has a way of carrying sound differently at night, like it knows when something more than music is about to happen. On April 18th, 2026, during weekend 2 of the festival, that air held something heavier than bass lines and crowd chants. It carried anticipation, memory, and a kind of emotional electricity that no one could have predicted, but everyone would feel. What unfolded on that stage wasn't just a performance. It was a collision of past and present, fandom and fame, vulnerability and fulfillment. And at the center of it all stood Justin Bieber and Billie Eilish, two global icons bound by something far more human than celebrity. Justin Bieber had already reclaimed the stage with a confidence that felt both earned and deliberate. His set moved seamlessly between eras, blending newer material with the songs that once defined a generation. For many in the audience, it was a celebration of his return, proof that it endured the personal battles, the public scrutiny, and the long silence that once cast doubt on his future in music. But beneath the polished production and carefully structured setlist, there was a quiet sense that something unexpected was coming. Billie Eilish, meanwhile, wasn't just another superstar watching from the sidelines. She was there as someone who had lived an entirely different version of the same story. Like Bieber, she had risen to fame at an age when most people are still figuring out who they are. She had built a career on emotional transparency, turning her inner world into music that resonated across continents. Yet for all her success, there was one part of her identity that had never changed: her admiration for Justin Bieber. That admiration was never a secret. Years earlier, she had spoken openly about being a devoted fan, about knowing his mannerisms, his style, the way he carried himself. It wasn't the kind of fandom that fades with success. It was rooted deeper than that, tied to formative moments and personal connection. Even as she stood on the same global stage as him, that part of her remained intact. So when whispers began circulating that something special might happen during Bieber's set, few could have guessed just how personal it would become. The shift came subtly. The lighting softened. The massive screens behind Bieber flickered with images from his early career, grainy YouTube clips, moments that captured a teenage boy on the brink of something unimaginable. The crowd recognized the transition instantly. This wasn't just nostalgia. It was a deliberate return to the beginning, a reminder of how far he had come. And then, almost without warning, Billie Eilish appeared. There was no dramatic introduction, no grand announcement. She walked on the stage and immediately dropped to her knees, overcome in a way that felt entirely unfiltered. The reaction from the crowd was immediate, a mix of cheers, laughter, and disbelief. But it quickly gave way to something quieter, more attentive. People sensed that they were witnessing something real. Bieber approached her with a calmness that contrasted her visible emotion. He pulled her into an embrace. And for a brief moment, the scale of the festival seemed to shrink. It no longer felt like 60,000 people watching a headline act. It felt like a private exchange unfolding in public. Then came the song. One Less Lonely Girl has always held a specific place in Bieber's career. It was more than a track. It was a ritual, a moment in his shows where he would bring a fan on stage and turn a performance into a personal memory. Over the years, it became symbolic of his connection with his audience, a reminder that behind the spectacle, there was always an individual experience. But this time was different. As Bieber began to sing, directing every word toward Eilish, the meaning of the song shifted. It was no longer about a random fan plucked from the crowd. It was about a full-circle moment, a global superstar being placed back into the role of the fan she once was. And she felt it completely. Eilish sat on a stool at center stage, her hands covering her face as tears streamed down. She laughed through the emotion, the kind of laughter that comes when feelings overflow and there's no way to contain them. Every so often, she would look up at Bieber, as if needing to confirm that the moment was real, that it wasn't some elaborate illusion. The crowd, initially loud and chaotic, began to settle into a shared stillness. Phones were raised, of course. This was Coachella. But even through the screens, people were reacting in real time. Some cried. Others simply watched, aware that they were witnessing something that couldn't be replicated. What made the moment so powerful wasn't just the history between the two artists, but the contrast in how they occupied it. Bieber, once a teenage sensation navigating overwhelming fame, now stood grounded in control and generous with his platform. Eilish, despite her own massive success, allowed herself to be vulnerable in a way that most public figures avoid at all costs. There was no performance in her reaction, no attempt to maintain composure for the cameras. She experienced the moment exactly as she felt it, and in doing so, reminded everyone watching of something easy to forget. That admiration doesn't disappear just because you achieve greatness yourself. For Bieber, the decision to share that moment carried its own significance. His return to the stage had already been marked by questions about his health, his longevity, and his place in an industry that moves quickly and often forgets its past. By choosing to center part of the performance around Eilish, he reframed the narrative. This wasn't just a comeback. It was a continuation, a recognition of the connections that define music beyond charts and accolades. By the time the song ended, the emotional weight of the moment had settled over the entire festival. Eilish stood, still visibly overwhelmed, and embraced Bieber once more. There were no grand speeches, no attempt to explain what had just happened. None was needed. Within hours, clips of performance spread across social media. Fans dissected every second, sharing their reactions, their interpretations, their own emotional responses. Many admitted they had cried watching it, even if they couldn't fully articulate why. The answer lay in the simplicity of the moment. In an industry often defined by image and control, what people saw that night was something unfiltered. Two artists who had grown up under intense public scrutiny allowed themselves to exist briefly, outside of those expectations. They met not as brands or personas, but as individuals connected by shared history and genuine feeling. It's easy to become cynical about celebrity culture, to assume that every interaction is calculated, every moment engineered for maximum impact. But occasionally, something breaks through that cynicism. Something that feels unscripted, unplanned, and undeniably real. That's what happened at Coachella. Long after the stage lights dimmed and the crowd dispersed, the impact of that moment lingered. It wasn't just about Bieber or Eilish. It was about what they represented. A reminder that even at the highest levels of success, there are still moments of pure, unguarded humanity. And perhaps that's why it resonated so deeply. Because beneath the fame, the spectacle, and the carefully curated images, people are still capable of being moved in ways that can't be controlled or predicted. On that night in the desert, Billie Eilish didn't just watch her idol perform. She lived a moment she had carried with her for years. And Justin Bieber, in turn, gave her, and everyone watching, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful performances aren't about perfection. They're about feeling something so real that you can't help but let it show.